BioVie is an innovative biotechnology company that is developing treatments for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and long COVID. And I'm joined today by BioVie's President and CEO, Kang Do. Kang, it's great to have you back here again. And there's been a lot in the news lately that touches on what BioVie does, and GLP-1s comes to mind. I mean, what's your take on these weight loss drugs?
You know, obesity is a real problem in the US, right? And it's a starting point that leads to many other medical complications. And when you're obese, the body releases a lot of free fatty acids, which interferes with how insulin works, which then leads to insulin resistance and, of course, type 2 diabetes, right? And when these fat cells die, they elicit an immune response, which then leads to inflammation. So when you use low doses of GLP-1, it essentially helps address some of the weight loss and reverses the insulin resistance. That's why it's such a good drug for type 2 diabetes. But when you use high doses of GLP-1, it tricks the body into sending signals to the brain that says you're full, right? That's why you lose your appetite, you don't eat a lot, and that's how you drive a lot of weight loss very quickly. Right, but that's why it's become such a big weight loss craze, right? But there are a lot of couple problems, for example, with this. One is that the weight loss tends to be indiscriminate. You lose weight not only from fat, but you also lose body mass as well, right? And then the second problem is that many people become intolerant to GLP-1s and have to go off the treatment. And experience shows that when you go off the treatment, you regain all that weight back very quickly. And that's why I don't believe GLP-1 is the only answer to weight loss.
Okay, maybe not the long-term solution for this. So what would be a better approach, do you think?
See, GLP-1 is the most famous of the two major molecules in a class called incretins. The other is GIP. And GIP's primary role in the body is to initiate the production of fat cells. Right? And if you block the activity of GIP, you block the formation of fat cells, and therefore you block weight gain through fat. Right? So I personally believe the best way to do obesity treatment is you start with a GLP-1 to induce the weight loss, and when you get to your targeted weight level, you then switch over to a GIP to maintain the weight, right? Prevent the formation of fat cells, right? And I'm working with a company called Incretin Therapeutics that's developing a GIP drug right now that we're hoping to be on the market in a few years.
Wow, very interesting. It's the first time I have heard that take on it. So now Novo announced their 2 phase 3 trials evaluating their GLP-1 failed. So can you explain the rationale for that trial? What's your thoughts about how it came out?
Sure. Novo used the GLP-1 to see if you can induce weight loss, and with that drive a reduction in inflammation and insulin resistance. Right? We had hoped that it would work, but we're not surprised that it did not work, right? Because many things cause inflammation and insulin resistance, and weight is only one of those. And the GLP-1 doesn't address all of those other factors.
Yeah. Now, how does the trial outcome affect BioVie and your work in Alzheimer's?
I actually think the trial affirms our work. We have always believed that there's a metabolic component to Alzheimer's, right? And unlike the GLP-1s and other drugs that affect only one pathway, our drug candidate, bezisterim, blocks the production of TNF-alpha at a place that we consider to be the central node of inflammation. So it doesn't matter where the inflammatory stimuli comes from, bezisterim blocks them all. And that's why we believe we will have a much, much better opportunity at having an impact on Alzheimer's than many of these one pathway approaches.
Okay. And then the Scripps Institute, backed by the Schmidt Initiative for Long COVID, recently installed a trial to test if GLP-1 could help address long COVID systems. So what are your thoughts on that?
Again, this trial used a different GLP-1, and the premise behind this is by hoping to reduce the weight gain, right, reverse obesity, you then can help reduce the inflammation and insulin resistance that comes along with that. And inflammation, of course, has been implicated as the key driver of long COVID symptoms, right? So the theory is if you can reduce weight, reduce inflammation, you can help address long COVID symptoms. We hope it works for the benefit of the patients, but we fear that's probably not going to be enough.
Okay.
Right.
And then what does the Scripps efforts do, and how is that different than what BioVie is trying to do?
So it's been known that long COVID symptoms are driven by two proteins, fragments of the spike proteins and fragments of the capsule proteins that continue to circulate in the body long after the COVID symptoms have been beaten. Right? And those two proteins work through something called toll-like receptor 4, or TLR4, and TLR2. And GLP-1s, unfortunately, are not expected to affect any of that. Right? And in addition, GLP-1s are not able to cross the blood-brain barrier to get into the brain or the CNS where it's needed. Right? So unlike the GLP-1, our drug candidate bezisterim freely crosses the blood-brain barrier, and it blocks the production of TNF-alpha 1 or 2 steps downstream from where TLR2 and TLR4 work. So that's why we believe our drug candidate has a much better chance of really affecting long COVID symptoms.
Now, how are you doing in terms of enrolling patients in the long COVID trial?
Our trial enrollment is actually accelerating at this point because most of our sites are now up and running, right? And there are huge academic medical centers that have large COVID centers out there. So centers such as Mount Sinai and Mayo are now fully up and running. They're recruiting patients, they're enrolling patients, right? And so we're hoping to keep that pace up. And frankly, if patients are interested or people are interested in learning more about our long COVID trial, please go to our website, www.biovipharma.com, and find a site that's close to you.
Now, there was an article in JAMA Neurology, that links sleep apnea with Parkinson's disease. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, sleep apnea essentially leads to deprivation of oxygen in the brain, right, because of reduced blood airflow. And that's just not good. Right?
Yeah.
And the brain is the brain. Once you reduce oxygen to the brain, it affects any symptom that a person may have. Now, this trial specifically looked at Parkinson's, so it's not surprising at all that when you reduce oxygen flow to the brain, you'll find higher risk of Parkinson's. But I would imagine that if you were looking at other CNS symptoms, diseases, Alzheimer's, ALS, and so forth, you will also find a link that says if you have sleep apnea, you run at higher risk of those diseases as well.
Yeah. Now, does this article support what BioVie is doing with bezisterim in terms of Parkinson's?
Oh, I believe so, absolutely. In our earlier trials, we have shown that bezisterim reverses insulin resistance, which is one of the two conditions you need to have to develop Parkinson's symptoms. And by reversing insulin resistance, our earlier trial have shown that Parkinson's patients can improve their muscle control. Now, we also know that bezisterim enhances blood flow to the brain, which means greater oxygen availability, right? So this study basically gets at the heart of that. If you can improve oxygen to the brain, you should run a reduced risk of Parkinson's and address those symptoms.
And where does it stand with that trial?
That trial is going very well right now. We hope to have the trial fully enrolled by the end of this year, which means we should have top-line results by second quarter of next year.
Okay, thank you. Great to get an update. Always doing so much interesting research. So thank you so much.
Right. Thank you for having me here, Jane.
Thank you.